I want to talk to you about self-signed certificates and everything you need to know to actually encrypt or validate your data, or even just let's just say secure your data. Okay. So here's an overview I want you to pay attention to. I first want to define what a self-signed certificate is, what it is not, and what it does actually to your website or other digital properties. Okay. So a self-signed certificate is actually a digital certificate issued and signed by the entity using it, not a trusted CA, not a trusted certificate authority. Okay. So while cost effective and quick to create, self-signed certificates are not recommended for public-facing websites or sensitive data due to a lot of things. You have security risks, you have lack of revocation, and no external validation. You got to have external validation to add an extra layer of accountability throughout the whole process. And self-signed certificates are usually better suited for internal testing environments because risks include browser warnings, vulnerability to attacks, and compromised encryption. So, creating a self signed certificate involves generating a private key, a certificate signing request, a CSR, and issuing the certificate. Okay. But your organization should consider trusted CAs for enhanced security. In other words, instead of doing it yourself, just you want to really outsource the task to a third party, to a CA. So, a self signed SSL TLS certificate is actually a digital certificate that's not signed by a publicly trusted CA. Okay. So, what I want to say here is that before you go that route, make sure that you want to use it for a limited purview. Don't do it for a public facing thing. And basically, the public can actually trust self signed certificates, but to a certain extent. Why? Because the entity signing the certificate has to be trustworthy too. And also, in terms of security, they are actually flagged by browsers because they're not issued by trusted CAs. Okay. So, what's the purpose of a self signed certificate type? Well, basically, you have various reasons. Basically, you want to really, you have pros and cons. Maybe you have let's say, projects going on, or you want to really provide your visitors more flexibility, more reliability in terms of the website's data. Okay. Now, self-signed certificates do not expire or need to be renewed after a set period of time, as is required by a CA certificate. Although this seems convenient, it is one of the major concerns because it means that those certificates cannot comply with security updates in response to discovered vulnerabilities, nor meet the certificate agility needed to secure today's modern enterprise. So when you think about a self-signed certificate, let me talk to you a little bit about the risks that you really can have. Okay, well, you have security warning pop-ups, you have no certificate security updates or revocation, self-signed certificate in certificate chain error, exposure to vulnerabilities, no warranty and technical support. That's really an important element to think about. You also have, depending upon your geography and also the type of websites you have, you might have lack of visibility and control, and you also not meeting security requirements. Let me go a little further. I want to really explain to you so you have a clear idea. For instance, when I say security warning pop-ups, so whenever a user visits a site that is using this type of certificate, which is never recommended on a public-facing site, the visitor will be prompted immediately with a security pop-up warning displaying errors like error self-signed cert or error cert authority invalid that require the user to confirm that they would like to proceed. Okay. Now, these errors are prompted by the user's browser and not the website itself, adding additional legitimacy to the user's concerns while introducing an additional step to visiting the website. That's number one. Number two, no certificate security updates or revocation. So, as mentioned a little earlier, your own certificates don't need to be renewed because they never expire. This means they're never updated or changed to fix vulnerabilities or meet the newest security standards. Okay. And this leaves your environment vulnerable to hackers and cyber attacks. Third, self-signed certificates in certificate chain error. So if a developer or IT team is trying to use a self-signed SSL certificate, he or she may internally come across the self-signed certificate in certificate chain error if using Open SSL. So what happened here is that in SSL TSL communications, trust is established through a chain of certificate. So leading back to a trusted root CA. So when a self-signed certificate is encountered in this chain, what happens here is that it breaks the trust model because this step is not inherently trusted. So it is just part of the whole process. You also have exposure to vulnerabilities. So compromised private keys can be a major threat to the organization's infrastructure. And you can report compromised certificates to their issuing certificate authority, and they will immediately revoke them. But for self signed certificates, there won't be any trusted revocation mechanism, so that could be a problem. In addition, organizations often fail to keep a tab on their self signed certificates, causing expired or compromised certificates getting overlooked or unnoticed. Okay, and such compromised certificates are the gateways for the malicious actors to gain access to the into the network and launch advanced and sophisticated malware attacks, man in the middle like the MITM attacks, phishing attacks, and botnets. You also have no warranty and technical support. So public certificate authorities often support. They actually offer support. They offer expertise, and they also sometimes provide management tools for their certificates because see the whole thing is their job, their full job, their full work is to really focus on having a certificate authority that's actually a valid. Okay, because you outsource the job to them, they'll do everything they can to make sure the the part of your process is taken care of. But if you do it yourself, you don't have that protection. Okay, for self-signed certificates, there is no support, there is no expertise, there is no management tool provided because these certificates are generated in-house. The thing is that if you really think about it, you need human and financial resources to keep control of those certificates. Okay, so this is really something to really think about. You also have lack of visibility and control, as well as not meeting security standards. Let me break it down for you. So, if your organization uses a self-signed certificates, there is actually a lack of transparency. Why? Because organizations use thousands of digital certificates issued by both private and public CAs, and it's kind of hard during the process. During the process, sorry about that. During the process, to track each of these certificates manually. So knowing how many certificates there are, who owns them, where they are located, and where the private keys are stored is kind of pivotal in strengthening cyber defense. Okay, so organizations using, let's say, countless self-signed certificates often end up having blurred visibility into the certificate infrastructure. Unfortunately, if there is a breach in your organizational network, you will not know if it is caused due to a compromised self-signed certificate and private key associated with it. So you kind of are in the dark there. Also, the non-compliance to security requirements, because digital certificates issued by trusted certificate authorities maintain robust standards, whereas self-signed certificates are generally not they don't have that coverage because they are generated internally, and they are very rarely aligned with the latest security standards due to lack of knowledge and failure to keep up with best practices. So that's one of those things where you have to really make sure that you take care of that aspect of things because it is really critical when you think about it. It is actually critical to manage and monitor all the digital certificates and keys existing within a corporate network. Because I don't, God forbid, if the corporate network actually has multiple, let's say, hundreds of nodes, hundreds of networks, hundreds of servers. That's kind of crazy, right? All certificates, both issued by CAs and self-signed certificates, responsible for the functioning of internal and public sites, must be secured and protected, and also undergo custom upgrading, but also constant monitoring. Okay, so there has to be some kind of follow up, if you will. Now, for internal LAN only services, you can use self signed certificates, but you have to have a strong policy in place to ensure that the issuing CA server is well protected from cyber criminals and is located in a place that is not accessible by all the employees of your organization, and that you have monitoring tools and a team in charge of managing the certificate estate, the certificate sort of program. So the big question is, should you use a self-signed SSL certificate? It really depends. It depends on your goal. It depends on your vision. It depends on your security status. I mean, and what kind of websites you have. Do you have a public-facing website? If you have a public-facing website, I wouldn't really advise you to really use a self-signed certificate. Okay. Now, if you have projects that have an inward vision, let's say you have internal projects within your company, or within your own freelancing activities, yes, you can use let's say a self-signed SSL certificate. So by choosing this type of SSL certificate, you are essentially on your own. Let me repeat that. If you choose a self-signed SSL certificate, you are essentially on your own. This means what? It means you don't have the backing of a trusted certificate authority and application of the latest cryptographic methods necessary to ensure proper authentication and encryption of data, devices, and application. So these types of certificates carry a lot of risks, especially once again, in a public facing capacity. So they are incredibly risky for a website that handles any private information, including health, tax, or financial records. So exposure of this info not only damages brand trust, but can harm an organization financially through fines and penalties by ways of applicable privacy regulations. I'm not even talking about the fact that you might have some ransomware from bad actors out there. So that's important, okay? So for those reasons, they are never recommended on public-facing websites or applications. So you might assume that using self-signed certificates internally carries no risk when deployed in areas such as employee portals or communication sites, but that is not true. It is not always true, because those types of certificates will still cause browser and security warnings, because as these warnings can be ignored, organizations will often instruct their employees to do so. Now, the safety of the internal site is assured, so this carries little harm directly. However, this can inadvertently cause the employees to get used to ignoring those types of warnings, okay? And that type of attitude, that type of behavior may expose the organization to increased risk and opportunity for vulnerability. So let me talk to you about the method here. So how do you create a self-signed certificate? So, while self-signed certificates are not really recommended due to the security risks involved, setting up the configuration file and completing the issuance process is actually straightforward, depending on your environment, like Apache or Ubuntu Linux servers. The first thing you want to do here is to generate a private key, okay? So to create actually the SSL certificate, both a private key and a certificate signing request, the CSR that I just mentioned a little earlier, those two documents or those two elements are necessary, okay? So a private key file and a CSR, they're necessary. And what happens here is that the process begins with requesting a private key from your CA. And private keys are cryptographic keys generated using algorithms such as RSA and ECC. So that's kind of cool, because it gives you an extra layer of security, but also extra layer of encryption. So RSA keys are one of the oldest cryptography systems for this process, and they are supported by many platforms. So that's really good. Now, though self-signing certificates are not recommended, here is a code example to generate a key with the following command. I'm going to put this on the screen so you can see the code example. Now, the command will prompt you for a passphrase, and the passphrase can be utilized by the CA to authenticate the certificate owner if the certificate needs to be, let's say, revoked for any reason. Stuff happens, okay? It wouldn't be revoked unless there is there is plausible cause that doing so will really help the process. So just be aware of that. And these things happen. I mean, for security reason, the CA is going to constantly looking at the integrity of the data, the security of the data, but also the safety of all stakeholders involved. So number one, you want to generate a private key. So if your goal is to actually, let's say, create a self-signed certificate this year, you want to generate a private key. And next, you need to also generate a CSR. So I spoke about a CSR before, but I want to really insist on that once again. So once generated, your private key will now be located in your current directory as a server name dot key, and will be used actually for many reasons, including used to generate your CSR. So let me give you a code example for the certificate signing request for a self-signing certificate. Again, I'm going to put this on the screen so you can see what it looks like. So after you do this, you will need to enter several pieces of information, including organization, organizational unit, country name, state, locality, and common name. And this is actually for identification purposes. Okay, you want to really provide all this info to your CA. So the common name is typically the domain name. So here I'm speaking about the DNS or IP address of the location. So after entering this information, a server name.csr file will be located in the current directory with a server name.key private key file. So that's kind of cool. It gives you more info. And finally, so after generating a private key and generating a CSR, you need to issue a certificate. So finally, a new certificate.crt is actually generated from the server key private key file and server CSR files. So that's really cool. Now, the certificate generated can be a root certificate or an intermediate one, depending on your application of the chain of trust. So let me give you a command example for generating a new certificate. Look on the screen right now what you have, okay? So just maybe copy and paste that. So similar to the previous step, its server name.crt file will be found in the current directory. So that's a good thing to really think about. But long story short, the process itself is pretty. The process of generating a new, let's say, a new self-signed certificate is pretty straightforward. Just make sure that you follow the exact steps that I just gave you textually to actually generate the required commands during each phase. So in closing arguments, in today's conversation, I spoke to you about self-signed certificates. I gave you the overview, the risks, the method, and now the closing arguments. Thank you so much. God bless you. I will see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.